"Barron," he began, his tone deliberately measured. "Many people feel that your mother, Melania Trump, was nothing more than an accessory to your father's presidency. Some even say she was uninvolved and uninterested. How do you respond to that?" A murmur rippled through the live studio audience. Barron's expression remained composed. His piercing blue eyes locked onto Whitaker with an unreadable calm. He leaned forward slightly, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make the host uncomfortable before delivering his response. "Daniel," Barron said evenly, "I find it interesting that you ask about my mother's involvement in the presidency, yet you seem to ignore everything she actually did. Is it that you don't know, or that you choose not to acknowledge it?" Whitaker hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough for the audience to catch it, but he quickly regained his footing. "Well, Barron, many feel that she was distant, rarely making public appearances compared to other first ladies." Barron allowed himself a slight smile. "Let's talk about that," he said. "You say many feel, but who exactly are these people? Are they the millions of Americans who admired her Be Best initiative, which focused on children's well-being, online safety, and opioid awareness? Are they the families she visited in hospitals across the country, offering support to children fighting illness? Or maybe you mean the men and women who saw her champion causes that went beyond politics, because my mother never needed the spotlight to make a difference." A ripple of applause stirred from the audience. Whitaker's jaw tightened, his fingers gripping his cue cards a little too firmly. "Well," he pressed on, "some argue that her silence during critical moments was a sign of complacency." Barron tilted his head slightly, as if genuinely intrigued by the question. "Or maybe," he countered, "her silence was a sign of grace. Not everyone needs to attack their opponents on Twitter to be effective. Not everyone needs to scream to be heard. Some people lead with action, not outrage." The audience erupted into cheers. Whitaker shifted in his chair, realizing his usual tactics weren't working. But he had one more play. He decided to go personal. "If she was so involved," he said, leaning in, "why do you think she was rarely seen at major political events? Even during key moments, she often remained in the background." Barron's expression remained calm, but this time there was a glint of steel in his eyes. "You mean, why didn't she stand in front of a podium every chance she got?" He shot back. "Daniel, my mother wasn't a politician. She was a first lady. She didn't chase power or clout. She focused on what actually mattered. Do you think a mother's love is measured by how often cameras catch her at an event, or by the impact she has behind the scenes?" The crowd was now fully engaged, murmurs of agreement sweeping through the audience. Whitaker opened his mouth to respond, but Barron wasn't finished. "The real question," Barron continued, "is why the media seems so obsessed with discrediting strong conservative women. My mother carried herself with dignity, and because she didn't fit into the mold of what you wanted a first lady to be, you call that uninvolved? The truth is, she didn't need your validation then, and she doesn't need it now." Thunderous applause filled the studio. Whitaker, for the first time in his career, looked genuinely caught off guard. He fumbled with his notes, searching for a way to regain control of the conversation. But it was too late. Barron had flipped the dynamic entirely. Sensing his position slipping, Whitaker attempted to regain control. "Surely you can acknowledge that public perception matters, Barron. It's not just about what she did behind the scenes. It's about how the public perceives her role." Barron leaned back slightly, his expression unshaken. "You're absolutely right," he conceded. "Perception does matter. But when that perception is crafted by a media that refuses to acknowledge facts, what does that say about journalistic integrity? Because here's the reality, Daniel. My mother wasn't absent. She was targeted. She was ridiculed for her accent, for her fashion choices, for standing by her family. She was scrutinized in ways that no other first lady was. And yet, she continued to work, continued to serve, and never once complained." If that's not strength, I don't know what is. The crowd's cheers grew louder, and Whitaker's composure cracked for just a second. He had been expecting a timid response, an easy target. Instead, he was facing a young man who had inherited not just his father's sharp wit, but also his mother's quiet resilience. The host cleared his throat, now clearly flustered. "Well, I think we're out of time," he muttered. Barron simply smiled, his mission complete. "Yes, I think we are." As the camera panned out, the audience was on its feet, giving Barron Trump a standing ovation. Whitaker, meanwhile, sat in stunned silence, his planned ambush having backfired in spectacular fashion. Sometimes, the most powerful voice in the room isn't the loudest. Sometimes, it's the one that speaks with confidence, clarity, and undeniable truth. And on that night, Barron Trump had done just that.